Hey, in this section we're talking about inequalities, and the first part of inequalities is making sure you understand interval notation. In a multiple choice format, as the online classes are, these brackets and parentheses are going to be super important. They also make things easier to you if you're trying to guess, obviously. But if you have the symbols greater than or equal to, so if you have either of these symbols, you're going to use parentheses. That's what your top little rule is telling you. If you have the one that has the little bar under it, means you're going to use brackets on those. Always write from left to right and use parentheses on the infinities. So I've given you a couple here to look over. So I see the first one is x is less than 3. So 3 is going to be sitting right here, and less than 3 means you're going to be shading towards the left. Those are the numbers less than 3. So what I do with them is I put up walls. Here's the left wall of my shaded region, and here's the right wall. So I always write from left to right. So my left wall, you'll see, is at infinity, and that infinity is actually negative infinity, and the right wall is at 3. So that's where your symbols come in. You're going to use parentheses on infinity, either infinity, and the 3 is going to depend upon this symbol right here. Since it doesn't have a little bar under it, you're going to use parentheses. Okay, looking at the second one, on the second one we talk about -1. It lies right here, and it's a number greater than or equal to -1. Now some of you may also be familiar with open or closed circles. I don't use them, but you're welcome to use them. So if I put up my walls for this one, I write from left to right. This left wall is at -1, and this right wall is at infinity. Infinity takes parentheses, always. This symbol here tells me that the -1 is going to take a bracket because it's got the bar under it. The question I get asked the most is, how do you know if the infinity is on the left or on the right? Well, the way that you tell is you read it from left to right. In this first example, I was at this arrow. That arrow represents negative infinity, so that's why I went from negative infinity to the number. If I look at this green region, left was -1, right was infinity. So that's why on the first example, infinity was on the left, negative infinity, and on the second example, infinity was on the right. In that last example, it's a compound inequality, and I'm asking you for the numbers between 3 and 4. X lies in between 3 and 4. I keep saying 3. I apologize for that. That would be -2 all day long. So trying that again, X is between -2 and 4. So here's my left wall, and here's my right wall. So we're going from -2 to 4. -2 uses parentheses, and 4 uses a bracket. Now let's start the real problems of the section. To solve an inequality, begin like it's an equation, but don't change it to an equation. The main difference between an inequality and an equation is if you multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the sign. Okay, so my first one, I'll make it a little bit bigger. It looks like this. Okay, so to solve that out, I'm going to move the 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and 2x would be less than 16. I'll divide both sides by 2, so I get x is less than 8. Now, that answer is great, but that's not how it's going to look on your test. So you have to find 8 on your number line. I just estimate it, and you have to shade. So you'll see it's pointing towards this direction. See how the inequality is pointing towards the green arrow? That's the way you're going to shade. Now remember, I told you to always write it from left to right. So writing this one out, you would go from negative infinity to 8, and 8 has parentheses, and that's what your answer would look like. Clean it up just a little. Okay, these aren't too bad. So here's our second one. I need to get the x by itself. So to get the x by itself, I'm going to subtract 4. So negative 7x is less than or equal to 21. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. I'm going to divide both sides by a negative. If you divide both sides by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. It was pointing towards the left, and now it's pointing towards the right. So x is greater than or equal to negative 3. When you divide by a negative, you have to flip the sign. So looking at it in interval notation, negative 3 would lie right here. You'll see the arrow is pointing in that direction, so that's the way that you're going to shade. So this problem is going to go from negative 3 on the left to infinity on the right. Remember, infinity always takes parentheses, and the 3 takes a bracket. The reason it takes a bracket is that you have the little bar right here. Okay, looking at your last one, we'll work it the same way. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. This one's a tricky one. So 2x is less than or equal to a negative 18. I'll divide both sides by 2, and I do not flip it. You'll say, well, wait, your answer's negative 9. It goes by what you divide by. Since I divided by a positive 2, no flipping. 2 is positive, so we don't flip it. So x is less than or equal to a negative 9. Okay, in interval notation, here's negative 9. Remember, I'm shading in this direction. So it would go from negative infinity to negative 9, and negative 9 takes a bracket. So that's how it would look. Okay, let's run down one more of these, and then we'll change our video. Okay, this last one here is called a compound inequality. It's really easy to do. You're trying to get the x by itself in the middle. So it's almost like you're going to pretend like part of it's not there. If I was solving this equation, of course, all I would do is, this inequality, all I would do was subtract 3 and then divide by 2. Well, that's the same thing I'm going to do here, except when I subtract 3 in the middle, I subtract it on the right, and I subtract it on the left. What I do to one part, I do to all 3 parts. So negative 2 is less than or equal to 2x, which is less than 8. I'll then divide by 2 in the middle. If I divide in the middle, I divide on the right and divide on the left. So negative 1 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 4. So this is going to go from negative 1 to 4. Left to right. Remember, the negative 1 is going to have a bracket because it's got the little bar under it. And the 14 has parentheses, the 4 has parentheses because it does not have the bar under it.